Jasmine had spent her entire 20s caring for her paralyzed husband, Devon. While her friends chased dreams and tried new jobs or relationships, she learned how to lift a man double her size without hurting his back or hers. She spoon-fed him soup when he refused to eat, massaged his feet when the blood stopped flowing properly, and memorized every single medication schedule. She told herself this was what love looked like when it wasn't easy. When he stared at the wall for hours without speaking, she sat with him until he smiled again. For 5 long years, Jasmine lived a life of service and sacrifice, convinced that what she was doing was noble, holy even. But that illusion shattered one bright morning. Jasmine had just arrived at the hospital with a bag of warm banana muffins, Devon's favorite. As she walked through the courtyard, she heard his voice drift from the other side of a column. He was laughing. "She's basically a free caregiver," he said to another patient nearby. "No payroll, no nagging. Young enough to still do the heavy lifting." Jasmine froze. Muffins still in hand, heart thudding. "She feeds me, cleans the house, handles the insurance," Devon added. "That's more than a wife. That's a full package for free." He laughed again, completely unaware that the woman he was mocking was standing just feet away. Jasmine couldn't move. Her feet felt welded to the ground. That single sentence, "free caregiver," rewrote every sacrifice she had made. The bag in her hand was still warm, still smelling of cinnamon and banana, but her body had gone cold. She didn't walk into the courtyard. She didn't confront him. She backed away as quietly as she could, terrified that if he saw her, she would crumble. She returned to the hospital room later with her face fixed in calm, placed the muffins on the table, and said nothing. Devon looked up and smiled. "You shouldn't wear yourself out, babe," he said lightly. "Told the guy downstairs you're the most reliable person I know." The words sounded sweet on the surface. But Jasmine had already heard what he meant. Reliable, useful, obedient. Not beloved. Not partner. That night, she didn't return to the hospital. The nurses could handle it, she thought. She stayed home, curled into the edge of a couch that wasn't really hers. The house had belonged to Devon and his late wife. When Jasmine married him, she'd suggested moving somewhere fresh, somewhere they could build from scratch. But Devon had said no. Trey, his teenage son, had grown up here. Wouldn't feel right to move him out, he insisted. Jasmine had let it go, just like she let so many things go. She moved in with 2 suitcases, a second-hand bookshelf, and a coffee table she refinished herself. She tried to make the house feel like a home. She scrubbed every wall, learned Devon's favorite recipes, and smiled when Trey muttered insults under his breath. On their first anniversary, she cooked a full Southern meal. Trey walked in, sniffed the air and said, "Smells like cafeteria food," then walked out without another word. Jasmine had laughed it off back then, believing kindness could win hearts. She didn't know that kindness, when unreciprocated, could become a chain. She stayed even after the accident that left Devon paralyzed. She had loved him, but that love was being erased. The accident had been tragic. A reckless driver had sideswiped Devon's car during a conference trip in Atlanta. Jasmine remembered the call, the rush to the hospital, the fear that soaked her bones as the doctors explained the spinal injury. When he finally came home in a wheelchair, broken in body but alive, she told him, "We'll get through this." And she meant it. She turned the downstairs office into a bedroom, installed handrails in the bathrooms, researched every piece of adaptive equipment. She spent hours on hold with insurance companies, nights massaging sore muscles, days convincing him that life could still have meaning. She mourned with him when his mother passed. She comforted him when Trey dropped out of college. Through every hardship, she stood firm, believing that love would be enough. But love, it seemed, was not enough to keep her from becoming invisible. The next morning, Jasmine woke early, just as she always did. She made breakfast: grits, eggs, turkey sausage. Devon's usual favorites. He was scheduled for discharge later that day. When she arrived at the hospital, she smiled through her exhaustion. The nurse wheeled Devon to the car. Nothing like coming home, he sighed. Jasmine buckled him in carefully, her fingers gentle but numb. She didn't reply. She didn't know what home meant anymore. Not really. The house didn't feel safe. It didn't feel like hers. It felt like a place where love had been confused with duty, and duty had become debt. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the kitchen window, Trey arrived. Jasmine heard the front door open and the thud of his backpack hitting the floor. He walked into the kitchen, made a beeline for the fridge, and grabbed a soda. "Dad good?" he asked without looking up. "He's resting," Jasmine replied. "Still needs help getting around. If you've got time." "Nah," Trey cut her off mid-sentence. "Got work later. Just came to grab some stuff." He leaned against the counter, eyes scanning the cabinets. Told Dad he should have sorted the will already. No point in leaving that messy. His tone was careless, dismissive, like she wasn't even standing there. Jasmine stood frozen. Trey plopped down at the kitchen table and kicked his feet up. "It's not like this place is yours anyway," he added. The sentence struck her harder than a slap. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, something inside her went still, like a room where the light suddenly cuts off. That night she didn't say goodnight. She didn't cook dinner. She walked to the kitchen switch, flipped off the light, and left Trey sitting in the dim hallway glow. She didn't need words. The silence said enough. Something had changed. She couldn't name it yet, but it was rising in her like a slow, certain tide. The day Devon came home from the hospital, the sunlight was harsh, bright and unforgiving as it poured across the driveway. Jasmine helped him into the car, adjusted the seat cushion and fastened his belt. He didn't thank her. She didn't expect it anymore. When they got home, he sighed with contentment as he settled onto the living room couch. "Missed this," he said. "Especially the remote. Hospital TV is garbage. Nothing but baking shows and bad news." Jasmine nodded. She fetched him a glass of water, fluffed the pillow, and turned on the fan. "Still no thank you." Later, she unpacked his medication bag and saw the pill organizer untouched, exactly where she'd left it 5 days ago. But for the first time, she didn't reach for it. That night, Jasmine sat across from Devon while he scrolled through his phone. She held an open book in her lap, but the pages didn't move. Her eyes weren't reading. Her mind was replaying his words from the courtyard like a scratched record. "She's basically a free caregiver." At first, she'd wanted to believe she misheard. Maybe the words weren't meant the way they sounded. But deep down she knew better. Days passed like smoke. Silent, choking, invisible. She found herself drifting, going through routines without emotion. When Devon asked for something, she responded without warmth. When he spoke, she barely met his gaze. Something inside her had begun to shut down. One afternoon, she wandered into the study, the room that once held Devon's workbooks, old photos, and neatly labeled folders. She opened the drawer where they kept important documents. Prescriptions in blue, bills in green, insurance in yellow. Everything was organized too perfectly. Behind a folder marked miscellaneous accounts, a single sheet slipped free and fluttered to the floor. Jasmine bent to pick it up. It was a life insurance declaration form. Her eyes scanned the lines. Beneficiaries: Trey Martin, Alexis B. Martin. No mention of her, not even as a backup. Not a footnote, not even a mistake. Jasmine stared at the paper until the names blurred. Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected money, but she had hoped to matter. That evening she made Devon's favorite, lasagna. She added spinach, ricotta, a dash of pepper flakes. No mozzarella. As he took a bite, his face twisted in disapproval. "Tastes weird," he muttered. "Where's the cheese? I told you I don't like it without mozzarella." "I was out," she said plainly. "Didn't have time." He looked at her like she had betrayed him, like a rule had been broken. "You've been acting off lately," he said. She met his eyes. "Maybe I'm just seeing things more clearly now." He leaned back, unsettled, but said nothing more. She sat with her book again. Still unread. Still pretending. But this time the mask was slipping. She was no longer a wife. No longer a companion. She had become a system. Quiet, efficient, invisible. A background character in someone else's life. 5 years by his side. And now she was little more than an appliance, expected to function but never thanked. Jasmine's back ached constantly. Her heart felt hollow. But what broke her wasn't just the labor. It was the knowledge that her love had been counted as free labor. And nothing more. The next morning she stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator. Her fingers traced the magnet holding up a photo from their first trip together. Savannah. She was smiling. He was too. But now she saw it differently. She had been carrying the weight even then. By that afternoon, Jasmine was done pretending. She picked up the phone and called a number she hadn't dialed in 2 years. When the voice answered, breathless but familiar, Jasmine whispered, "Nia, it's me." There was a pause on the line. Then warmth. "Jazz. Are you okay? Do you have a minute?" Jasmine asked, her throat tight. "I've got the whole day," Nia replied. "Where are you? Come over." Jasmine didn't pack. She didn't explain. She grabbed her purse, her keys, and walked out the door without a word to Devon. She wasn't running. She was reclaiming. Nia was waiting at the door of her flower shop, apron still on, arms open wide. Jasmine stepped into the embrace, and for the first time in years, her shoulders relaxed. Nia led her to the back patio, handed her a glass of ginger mint tea, and sat quietly. "You look like someone who's been holding in a scream," she said. Jasmine didn't deny it. She began to speak, hesitantly at first, then all at once. She told Nia everything. About the hospital courtyard, about the insurance papers, about Trey and the way Devon had treated her like she was born to serve. Nia listened without interruption, her face still and steady. When Jasmine finished, silence settled between them. Nia finally said, "You weren't married, Jazz. You were managing a patient." Jasmine blinked. "He didn't see you as a partner," Nia continued. "He saw you as a service. And you don't owe your life to anyone just because they needed your hands." Jasmine looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm only 30. But I feel like I've aged double that." "You're still young," Nia said gently. "But you've been carrying someone else's weight for so long, you forgot how to walk without it. That stops now." Jasmine moved into the guest room above Nia's flower shop that same week. The room was small. Twin bed, a creaky ceiling fan peeling sunflower wallpaper, but it was hers. She began to wake without dread pressing on her chest. Nia's flower shop, petals and purpose, sat in Durham's historic district. On the back patio bloomed yellow roses Nia called freedom blooms. Surrounded by hyacinths and cosmos, Jasmine slowly remembered what peace felt like. The woman she once was, the one buried under years of caregiving and dismissal, began to surface. And Nia became her mirror. One afternoon, sipping hibiscus tea, Nia said, "You know, most people think the hardest part is leaving. But it's not. It's believing you're allowed to." Jasmine nodded. The truth stung. For 5 years, she thought staying meant loyalty. That endurance meant strength. But now she saw it. Staying had been her slow undoing. Leaving was saving herself. Nia connected her with a legal firm, Talia and Hartwell, women-owned and known for helping unpaid caregivers in marriages like hers claim rights. "You were never just his helper," Nia told her. "Let's make sure the law sees that too." At the firm, Talia, sharp, composed and fierce, flipped through Jasmine's documents. Marriage certificate, hospital bills, receipts, bank records. "Did you work during the marriage?" she asked. "Freelanced as an editor part-time but stopped 3 years ago," Jasmine said. "His care became full-time." Talia nodded. "Did you contribute financially?" "Yes," Jasmine replied. "Paid off some of his credit cards early on, covered a semester of Trey's tuition." Talia scribbled notes. "Then you didn't just invest in love. You invested in the household. That matters." Jasmine blinked. Even if the house is still in his name. Doesn't matter, Talia said, leaning forward. You're not a guest. You're his wife, his caregiver, and legally, his dependent. Jasmine left the law firm with something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Talia's words echoed in her mind. You were never just his free helper. That evening, back in the small sunflower guest room above Nia's shop, Jasmine stared at the ceiling fan and let herself think. Not about what Devon might say. Not about Trey's eye rolls. But about her own life. The birthdays she celebrated alone, the countless meals she cooked without thanks, the hours spent in silence while folding laundry for a house that never acknowledged her presence. For the first time, she stopped thinking of herself as someone who abandoned her marriage. She was someone who had saved herself. The next morning, Jasmine took a deep breath and filed for separation. It felt surreal, standing there in front of the courthouse clerk, sliding paperwork across the counter. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From relief. Afterward, she called Sandra, her cousin on her mother's side. Sandra had always been the fixer in the family. A financial consultant who helped women find their footing after messy breakups. Jasmine had been too embarrassed to call her before, but this time she didn't hesitate. As soon as Sandra picked up, she didn't even say hello. It's time, isn't it? She asked. Jasmine swallowed the lump in her throat. Yeah, it really is. Sandra didn't waste time. Within days, she connected Jasmine with a financial advisor to open her own bank account and begin separating her finances from Devon's. They reviewed credit reports, estimated marital assets, and flagged everything that Jasmine had contributed. Financially, physically, emotionally. Sandra also introduced her to Second Sunrise, a support group for women navigating life after invisible labor. Jasmine attended her first Zoom session with 3 other women. All black. All under 40. All with stories that mirrored hers. One had cared for her disabled boyfriend for 10 years. Another had funded her husband's law school education, only to be left for someone younger. The third woman in the group was battling a prenup she hadn't fully understood when she signed it. As the stories poured out, Jasmine realized she wasn't foolish for having loved. She wasn't naive. She was human. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel isolated. She felt seen. Understood. They laughed. They cried. They built each other up. When Jasmine logged off that night, she sat on the bed and smiled. Not because everything was solved, but because the healing had started. She no longer had to carry her grief alone. There were women who had walked this road before her, and survived. Back at Devon's house, things had shifted. The silence Jasmine had left behind had started to speak louder than any fight. Devon began texting. At first it was polite. Hey, you good? Let me know if you're dropping by to pick up anything. Then came the guilt. You can't just run off without talking this through. What are people going to say? And finally the gaslighting. You're overreacting. You're going to ruin your life over a few hurt feelings. Jasmine didn't reply. She let silence do the talking. Silence had once made her invisible. Now it became her boundary. One evening, Nia walked up the stairs holding her phone, brows furrowed. You may want to see this, she said gently, passing it to Jasmine. On the screen was a post from Trey's social media. Rant. Some people want sympathy for choices they made. My dad's not a villain just because he didn't give his whole life to someone who knew what they were signing up for. Y'all love drama. Jasmine stared at the screen. There was no shock. No anger. Just tiredness. She handed the phone back to Nia and quietly deleted the app. Public opinion didn't matter. She wasn't chasing validation anymore. She was building a new story. Back in court, Talia moved fast. She filed motions requesting Devon's full financial disclosures, insurance policies, bank statements, retirement funds. And that's when the truth slipped out. One document revealed Devon had quietly transferred $40,000 into Trey's account, just 2 months before Jasmine left. No consultation. No mention. Just a shadow move. The court flagged it. This is an attempt to divert marital assets, Talia said, her eyes sharp. We'll challenge it. For the first time, Jasmine saw the legal system tilt ever so slightly in her favor. She wasn't just heard, she was protected. Then came the call. Devon's lawyer reached out to Talia and suggested a private settlement, without Jasmine present. No, Talia said firmly. My client isn't looking for secrecy. She's seeking justice. She earned that right. When Talia told Jasmine about the call, Jasmine felt something lift. Not because she had won, but because she had stopped losing herself. The woman who had tiptoed around a kitchen just weeks ago was now the woman who was unafraid to stand tall in court. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for recognition, for respect, for her name to mean something on paper, because it had already meant everything in service. The night before the court date, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She lay in bed at Nia's, watching moonlight flicker across the walls. The air was quiet, cool. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd sacrificed, but also how much she had reclaimed. In the morning she dressed simply. Navy slacks, cream blouse, no makeup. She didn't want to win with appearance. She wanted to win with truth. Nia made her a small breakfast. Steel-cut oats, a spoon of almond butter and mint tea. You ready? Nia asked, standing by the door. Jasmine took a breath. I've never been more ready. Sandra pulled up in her gray sedan outside the flower shop. She was dressed sharp, hair pulled back in a bun, all focus. You look like a woman who knows her worth, she said with a faint smile as Jasmine got in. At the courthouse, everything moved fast. Talia handled the pre-hearing filings while Jasmine waited outside the courtroom. Hands folded, heart steady. Devon arrived an hour later, wheeled in by Trey. He looked smaller, diminished not just by illness but by the weight of avoidance. His eyes met Jasmine's for a second before darting away. The woman before him wasn't his caregiver anymore. She was his equal, and she was no longer afraid. The courtroom was simple. No grandeur, just rows of benches, soft lighting, and the weight of stories unfolding. Jasmine sat beside Talia, listening intently as the judge asked preliminary questions. Talia outlined Jasmine's contributions: unpaid full-time caregiving, household management, financial support during Devon's periods of unemployment, and the emotional toll of 5 years spent caring for a man who never once said thank you. Devon's attorney countered with legal jargon, emphasizing that the house was in his name, that Jasmine had voluntarily assumed the role of caregiver. Talia didn't flinch. She volunteered out of love, she said firmly. But love doesn't mean forfeiting legal rights. When the discussion turned to the $40,000 transfer, Devon's lawyer stammered. It was a gift, he claimed, from a father to his son. The judge leaned forward. A gift of that size during a marriage without spousal awareness is questionable. Talia stood, voice crisp. Your Honor, this transfer occurred just 8 weeks before Ms. Martin separated from her husband. It was not a gift. It was an attempt to protect assets from equitable distribution. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She sat quietly, her spine straight, her breath steady. She had already done the hardest part, leaving. Everything else was just evidence. After the session, the judge requested a short recess. Jasmine stepped outside with Talia and Sandra, the air cooler than she expected. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes, and let her heart beat out its truth. Sandra rubbed her back gently. You're doing good, Jazz. You're not invisible anymore. Jasmine opened her eyes. Even if I don't win everything, I'm not walking away with nothing. I have myself again. That's everything, Talia said, glancing at the courthouse doors. Still, I'm confident. The law may not always get it right, but today, it sees you. Later that week, Devon's legal team proposed a settlement. The offer included a portion of the joint savings, partial spousal support, and a request to keep the house. Talia looked it over and turned to Jasmine. What do you want? She asked. Jasmine stared at the papers. I don't want the house, she said. It never felt like mine. Let him have it. But I want my name on the caregiving acknowledgement clause. I want it documented that I gave 5 years of unpaid full-time care. I want the court to see that." Talia nodded slowly. "You want your labor valued?" "Yes," Jasmine replied. "Because it mattered." In the final hearing, the judge read the agreement aloud. Jasmine heard her name spoken with clarity. Not as an add-on, not as a whisper, but as a person who gave her time, her energy, her compassion, and was legally recognized for it. When the gavel struck wood, Jasmine didn't cry. She smiled faintly, thanked the court, and walked out with her shoulders squared. Devon didn't speak to her. Trey avoided her gaze. But none of that mattered. Jasmine hadn't come for their approval. She came for her dignity. And she left with it intact. Back at Nia's flower shop, a vase of yellow roses sat on the windowsill. Jasmine walked in that afternoon and took a deep breath. The air smelled like lavender and lemon balm. Nia looked up from the register and grinned. "How'd it go?" Jasmine nodded. "It's over. Legally. Emotionally. I'm still working on that part." Nia came around the counter and hugged her tightly. "You're allowed to feel all of it. Grief, relief, anger, peace. Let it come in waves. Just don't drown in it." Jasmine exhaled. "I think for the first time I can actually breathe." In the weeks that followed, Jasmine began to rebuild not just her legal identity, but her inner one. She started attending workshops through Second Sunrise, learned about financial literacy, boundaries, and even joy. She and Nia took long walks in the botanical gardens, sipping iced tea and talking about the future. Jasmine began freelancing again, editing articles for wellness magazines and memoir excerpts for first-time authors. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. Some mornings she still woke up feeling the ghost of her past life on her skin. But now she had tools. She had language. She had herself. One quiet Sunday morning, Jasmine sat on the back patio of the flower shop, trimming dead leaves from a pot of cosmos. A customer walked by, complimenting the blooms. "We call these second chances," Nia said from inside, arranging tulips into a display. Jasmine smiled. "Fitting, isn't it?" That day, a young woman entered the shop and asked about the bouquet in the window. Jasmine walked over, helped her choose one, and wrapped it in brown paper with gentle fingers. The woman said, "You look like someone who knows what healing smells like." Jasmine chuckled softly. "Maybe I do." That evening, Jasmine sat in the guest room, journaling by the light of a bedside lamp. She wrote not about Devon or Trey or the court proceedings. She wrote about her favorite teas. About the feeling of bare feet on cool wooden floors. About her dream of someday opening a book cafe filled with sunlight, quiet corners, and wildflowers on every table. She didn't rush the page. She didn't apologize for the dream. She let the ink flow like a whisper finally being heard. And when she closed the journal, she placed her hand over it and whispered, "Thank you, self, for staying." Later that week, Jasmine received a letter in the mail from the court. Official documentation of her separation, her rights, and the recorded acknowledgement of her years of unpaid caregiving. She held the paper in her hand for a long time, then tucked it into a folder labeled Me. The folder wasn't blue or green or yellow. It was maroon with soft leather edges. "Gift from Nia. Because you deserve a category of your own," she had said. Jasmine placed the folder gently into her drawer. This time she wasn't background. She wasn't miscellaneous. She mattered, and she knew it. A few days later, Jasmine received an unexpected email. It was from Devon's lawyer, this time addressed to her directly. The message was short, formal. Per Devon Martin's request, enclosed are final personal items you may wish to collect. Please confirm a pickup time. Jasmine stared at the screen. She felt no panic, no hurt, just the odd calm of closure. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she walked to the window of Nia's spare room and looked out at the midday sun. "He's finally letting go," she murmured. "Or maybe," she added with a small smile, "he realized I already did." That weekend, Jasmine and Sandra drove to Devon's house together. The air in the car was quiet but not heavy. As they pulled into the driveway, Jasmine saw the porch light was still broken, something she had asked Devon to fix over 3 years ago. Inside, a small cardboard box sat by the door. No one came to greet her. Not Devon. Not Trey. Sandra waited in the car as Jasmine stepped inside. She opened the box and found a few books, a scarf, and a ceramic mug that said, "Queen of Calm." It made her laugh. Quietly. Almost fondly. On the way back, Sandra glanced over. "You okay?" Jasmine nodded. "It's funny. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd feel something big." Sandra smiled softly. Sometimes healing is a quiet thing. Jasmine looked out the window at the rows of trees rushing past. That house felt like a life sentence. But now, it's just a place I used to live. Sandra squeezed her hand. "And where you stopped surviving, started living." Jasmine said nothing. But inside, a small flame flickered. Bright, steady, new. The following week, Jasmine began volunteering at a local women's resource center. She helped with intake paperwork, led journaling sessions, and brought fresh flowers from Nia's shop every Monday morning. Many of the women came from stories like hers. Quiet caretakers, underappreciated spouses, women whose sacrifices were erased in the fine print of marriage. Jasmine didn't preach. She didn't need to. She listened. And sometimes in private moments she shared pieces of her story. One woman cried in her arms after hearing it. Another whispered, "You make me feel like I can start over too." And Jasmine knew. Her pain had bloomed into purpose. At night, Jasmine often sat on Nia's back patio, her feet up, a cup of tea in her hands. The stars always looked clearer from there. Nia would sometimes join her, bringing slices of mango or roasted groundnuts. They talked about everything. New books, old heartbreaks, soft futures. "What would you do if you weren't scared?" Nia asked one evening. Jasmine thought for a moment. "I'd open that book cafe. The one I used to dream about." Nia nodded. "Then let's start looking at spaces." Jasmine blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" Nia grinned. "Dead serious. It's time to build something that's all yours." And so they did. It started slowly. Weekends spent scouting rental spaces, evenings drafting ideas on napkins and receipts. They called it Spines and Petals. A cafe bookstore hybrid filled with wildflowers, soft lighting, and shelves curated with care. Jasmine poured herself into it, not just the business but the meaning. Every corner was intentional. She set up a quiet table for journaling, a shelf labeled for starting over, and a rotating flower arrangement by the window. The opening day was a soft launch. Just friends, local women from the support group, and a few curious passers-by. Jasmine wore a yellow sundress and greeted each guest with warmth that felt hard-earned. Trey showed up uninvited. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, hands in his pockets, glancing around. Jasmine was stunned for a moment, then approached him calmly. "You came," she said. He nodded. "Dad told me about the court stuff. Said I was too harsh." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You were." He looked down. "I didn't get it back then. I see it now." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured to a table. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. They sat. It wasn't warm. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a start. After Trey left, Jasmine stood behind the counter and took a moment to herself. She looked around the shop, at the women reading in the corner, at the flowers blooming in the vases, at Nia joking with a customer about tea preferences. This wasn't just a shop. It was a second chance sculpted with tenderness and earned clarity. A place where her story wasn't buried in labor or silenced by shame. It was alive, visible, and healing others as it healed her. She exhaled and smiled. She hadn't just built a business. She had built a home, for herself and for others like her. Months passed. Jasmine continued her editing work part-time, balancing quiet mornings with the gentle hum of the cafe. Second Sunrise invited her to be a guest speaker. She told her story without shame. She talked about burnout, betrayal, and what it means to be a woman who gives too much. But she also talked about reclaiming herself. I didn't leave my marriage because I stopped loving, she said. I left because I finally started loving myself. The women in the room wept. Some clapped. Others sat still, holding their breath. But they all heard her. Every word. One evening, Jasmine found a letter in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a short note in Devon's handwriting. I never said thank you. Not once. You didn't deserve that. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted to say I see it now. I see you. Jasmine read it twice. Then folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer under her journal and whispered, It's too late. But thank you. Not thank you for the letter, but for the confirmation that she had never imagined it. Her pain had been real. And her choice to walk away had been right. Spring arrived gently in Durham, painting the streets with pink blossoms and cool winds. At spines and petals, jasmine vines curled along the patio railings like blessings. Jasmine now kept a gratitude jar near the register, inviting customers to drop notes inside. One afternoon, while sweeping the front steps, she opened one. It read, This place saved me. Thank you for creating a corner of peace in a loud world. She smiled and tucked it in her apron. This was why she had fought so hard, not just to escape the past, but to build something that made the present feel like freedom. Her days were full but never heavy. She taught a journaling class on Thursdays, stocked new arrivals on Mondays, and hosted poetry nights once a month. The walls of the cafe were lined with photographs of women who had rebuilt their lives, each one framed in gold. Jasmine called it the resilience wall. She hadn't hung her own photo yet. She didn't feel like the journey was over. But Nia often joked, Girl, your picture belongs in the center. Jasmine would just laugh and say, Maybe soon. Healing wasn't linear, she had learned. But it was steady. One Sunday morning, Jasmine sat at her favorite table by the window with a cup of lemongrass tea and her journal. The shop was quiet, filled only with soft jazz and the faint rustling of pages. She began to write, Today I choose ease. I choose rest without guilt. I choose love that doesn't cost me my voice. She paused, pressing the pen to her lips. For a moment she thought of Devon. Not with anger, but with distance. Like someone who had once occupied a chapter, but not the whole book. She was finally writing the rest of the story on her own terms. Around noon, Nia peeked in from the kitchen with flour on her nose. We're out of cinnamon rolls again, she grinned. Jasmine laughed. That's a good problem to have. They spent the next hour kneading dough, music playing from an old Bluetooth speaker, sunshine draping the counter. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. Later, Nia turned to her and said, So, what's next for you? Jasmine wiped her hands on a towel. I don't know exactly, she replied. But I'm not afraid to find out. That was the truth. For the first time, her future wasn't a tunnel, it was a sky. That evening, Jasmine stood alone on the shop's back patio. The sky above was a deep navy, scattered with stars. She wrapped herself in a light shawl and breathed in the scent of blooming roses. A wind brushed past her face, not harsh but strong. It reminded her of how far she had come. From a forgotten wife to a fierce survivor. From a silent caregiver to a voice of strength. She looked up and whispered, I didn't just survive. I changed. And in the silence that followed, the world seemed to agree. Devon passed away the following year. Jasmine heard the news from a mutual friend. The funeral was small, private. She didn't attend. She sent no flowers. But she lit a candle in the cafe that evening. Small, white, unlabeled. Nia watched her do it. Closure, she asked. Jasmine nodded. Something like that. There were no tears, no pangs of regret. Just a soft breath. A full stop at the end of a story she no longer needed to revisit. That night, Jasmine closed the cafe early, walked home and slept deeply, dreamless and unburdened. Weeks later, Jasmine updated the resilience wall. She added a new frame in the center, her own photo taken by Nia. In it, she was standing barefoot in the cafe, apron tied loosely, holding a bouquet of daisies and cosmos. Her smile was unposed. Her eyes were calm. Underneath, she wrote the caption herself. Not a survivor. A rebuilder. Customers noticed. They asked about the photo, and Jasmine would simply say, "That one's me. That's what healing can look like." And somehow, just those few words gave others permission to believe it for themselves. One afternoon, a young woman entered the shop in tears. She looked lost, her hands trembling as she asked, "Is there someone here I can talk to?" Jasmine took her gently by the hand and guided her to the back patio. There, with tea and soft cushions, she listened as the woman poured out her story. When she was done, Jasmine handed her a small card that read, "Second Sunrise, Weekly Support Sessions." Then she looked the woman in the eyes and said, "You're not alone. And you're not broken. You're just in the middle. And the middle is where new stories begin." That night, Jasmine stayed late at the shop, cleaning the tables and reshelving books. She paused at the shelf marked for starting over, adjusting a paperback slightly out of line. Her hand lingered there for a moment, as if blessing the shelf. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, her heart was full. She no longer needed grand endings or loud victories. Her peace came in pages, in petals, in the echo of women finding their strength again. She had built more than a shop. She had built a haven. One flower. One book. One voice at a time. Before locking up, Jasmine returned to her journal. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, "I thought the unthinkable was leaving, but it was actually staying." Then she smiled and added, "I did the unthinkable. I chose me." She closed the book, turned off the lights, and stepped into the night. The world outside felt wide and waiting, full of possibility. And Jasmine, no longer a ghost in someone else's story, walked forward. Whole. In. Free.